In 1917, over the blood-soaked battlefields of France, German pilots whispered about a legend in the sky. They called him the Black Swallow of Death, an American pilot who flew with such fearless precision that he seemed untouchable. What they didn't know was that this aerial warrior had been rejected by his own country's military for one reason: the color of his skin. This is the story of Eugene Jacques Bullard, America's first black military pilot, a man who escaped Jim Crow Georgia to become a World War I hero, only to return home to work as an elevator operator in the same building where television stars made millions. His journey from a sharecropper's son to the Knights of the Air is a tale of extraordinary courage, devastating betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Chapter 1. The boy who dreamed of France. Our story begins not with triumph, but with terror. October 9, 1895, Columbus, Georgia, the heart of Jim Crow America. Eugene James Bullard was born into a world designed to crush his dreams before they could form. He was the seventh of 10 children born to William Octave Bullard and Josephine Thomas, a former slave and a Creek Indian woman trying to build a life in the shadow of slavery's aftermath. William Bullard stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and worked the docks along the Chattahoochee River. His size and Creek heritage earned him the nickname Big Chief Ox, but size meant nothing against a mob's hatred. Young Eugene would never forget the night the crackers came. His father had defended himself against a white supervisor's attack, throwing the man into a cellar after being struck with a large hook. That act of self-defense nearly cost William Bullard his life. They came on horseback, demanding William come out to face their twisted justice. Inside the darkened house, the Bullard family sat in terrified silence. Eugene, barely old enough to understand, watched his father grip a loaded rifle and wait. The mob banged on their door, shouting threats, promising violence. Eventually, they gave up and rode away. But the boy had learned his first lesson about American justice. Sometimes survival meant hiding in the dark. The trauma of that night planted a seed in young Eugene's mind. His father had filled his imagination with stories of France, a place where, he claimed, black people were treated as equals, where skin color didn't determine destiny. Someday, William would tell his son, "You'll see that not all white people are the same. In France, they judge a man by what's in his heart, not the color of his skin." It was a dream that would carry Eugene across oceans. But first, he had to escape the nightmare at home. When Eugene was 11 years old, his world shattered completely. His mother Josephine died, leaving the children orphaned in spirit if not in fact. His older sister Pauline, who had stepped in as surrogate mother, married and moved to Alabama. The family scattered like seeds in a harsh wind. On a spring morning in 1906, with $1.50 earned from selling his pet goat, 11-year-old Eugene Bullard walked away from Columbus, Georgia forever. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and his father's stories about France. What happened next sounds like something from a Mark Twain novel. The runaway boy made his way to Atlanta, where he encountered something extraordinary: a clan of British Romani people who went by the surname Stanley. These traveling horse traders and performers took pity on the young boy and allowed him to join their caravan. For 3 years, Eugene lived a life that most children could only imagine. He learned to tend horses, to race them at county fairs, to survive by wit and hard work. The Stanleys treated him with a kindness he had rarely experienced from white people in America. They told him stories of England, where racial barriers didn't exist as they did in the American South. But the Stanleys weren't planning to return to Britain anytime soon, and Eugene's dream of France burned ever brighter. In 1909, he left the Romani family and found work with the Turner family of Dawson, Georgia. The Turners were different from most white Southern families. They saw Eugene's potential and treated him with respect. As their stable boy, Eugene proved himself hardworking and trustworthy. He was so skilled with horses that the Turners asked him to ride as their jockey in the Terrell County Fair races in 1911. For a brief moment, Eugene tasted what it might feel like to be judged by ability rather than color. But even kindness couldn't quench his thirst for true freedom. Eugene had made up his mind. He would reach Europe by any means necessary. In 1912, at the age of 17, he made his way to Norfolk, Virginia, determined to stow away on a ship bound for Europe. The German freighter Martha Russ sat in Norfolk's harbor, preparing to sail for Hamburg. Eugene studied the ship's routine, waiting for his chance. When it came, he slipped aboard and hid in the cargo hold, becoming one of thousands of Americans who would cross the Atlantic seeking opportunity. When the crew discovered him days later, Eugene expected to be thrown overboard. Instead, they put him to work, allowing him to earn his passage. After 2 weeks at sea, the Martha Russ docked in Aberdeen, Scotland. Eugene Bullard stepped onto European soil for the first time on a grey Scottish morning. He was 17 years old, penniless, and speaking no language but English. But he was free in a way he had never been in America. The Europeans he encountered treated him, as he later wrote, just like one of their own. He felt that he had been born into a new world. From Scotland, Eugene made his way to London, where he discovered he had a talent that could keep him fed boxing. In the rough gyms of early 20th century London, skin color mattered less than the ability to throw a punch. Eugene proved he could do both with remarkable skill. He trained under Dixie Kid, a well-known boxer who saw potential in the young American. Eugene learned the sweet science of boxing while also performing in music halls, including a stint with an African-American troupe called the Freedmen Pickaninnies. It was crude entertainment by today's standards, but it kept Eugene alive and moving toward his ultimate goal. In 1913, Eugene's boxing skills earned him an invitation to fight in Paris. The moment he stepped off the train in the City of Light, he knew he was home. Paris in 1913 was a cosmopolitan wonder. Artists, writers, musicians, and dreamers from around the world gathered in its cafes and cabarets. And unlike America, Paris judged people by their talents rather than their ancestry. Eugene found work in a music hall and continued his boxing career. He was making a name for himself in Parisian sporting circles when the world exploded into war. Chapter 2. Baptism by Fire. World War I began in August 1914, and by October, 19-year-old Eugene Bullard had made a decision that would define his life. While America remained neutral, Eugene enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. His reasoning was simple: France had given him the freedom America denied, and he would defend that freedom with his life. The French Foreign Legion was the perfect home for men like Eugene, men without countries, men seeking redemption, men running from their pasts or toward their futures. The Legion asked few questions and judged recruits by their courage rather than their origins. Eugene was assigned to the 3rd Marching Regiment of the Foreign Legion and thrown immediately into the hell of industrial warfare. By 1915, he was a machine gunner fighting on the Somme front in Picardy. The Western Front was a moonscape of mud, wire, and death that stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. Eugene fought in the Second Battle of Champagne, where hundreds of thousands of men died for gains measured in yards. The Foreign Legion suffered catastrophic casualties, starting 1915 with nearly 22,000 men, ending with fewer than 11,000. Eugene was among the survivors, but survival came at a price. The Americans and other foreign volunteers were eventually allowed to transfer to regular French army units. Eugene chose the 170th French Infantry Regiment, an elite unit nicknamed Les Hirondelles de la Mort, the Swallows of Death. It was a name that would prove prophetic. In February 1916, Eugene and the 170th Infantry were sent to Verdun, where Germany had launched the largest offensive of the war. The Battle of Verdun would rage for 10 months and claim over 700,000 casualties. It was here that Eugene Bullard would truly prove himself as a soldier. For weeks, Eugene crouched in trenches under constant artillery bombardment. The noise was so intense that men went insane from shell shock. The mud was so deep that wounded soldiers drowned in it. Rats the size of cats fed on corpses. Gas attacks sent men stumbling blind through no man's land, their lungs burning, their skin blistering. Through it all, Eugene fought with the desperate courage of a man defending his adopted homeland. On March 5, 1916, during a German assault, shrapnel from an exploding shell tore into Eugene's head, sending him to a field hospital more dead than alive. As he recovered from his wounds, Eugene made a bet with a fellow soldier, $2,000, that he could become a pilot and join the French Air Service. It seemed like an impossible wager. Flying was still a new and deadly profession, claiming the lives of most who attempted it. But Eugene had learned something about himself in the trenches of Verdun. He was a survivor. On October 2, 1916, Eugene volunteered for the French Air Service. He was accepted and underwent training at the Aerial Gunnery School in Cazaux. From there, he went to flight training at Châteauroux and Avoord, learning to pilot the fragile wood and fabric aircraft that were the cutting edge of military technology. On May 5, 1917, Eugene Bullard received pilot's license number 6950 from the Aero Club de France. He had become the world's first black military pilot. Eugene joined 269 other American aviators in the Lafayette Flying Corps, the designation for all American pilots serving with the French Air Service. These men were the Knights of the Sky, engaging in aerial duels above the trenches where Eugene had nearly died. On August 27, 1917, Eugene was assigned to Escadrille 93, based at Beauzy-sur-Aire, south of Verdun. His squadron flew Nieuport and Spad fighters decorated with the image of a flying stork. Eugene painted his own aircraft with the motto Tout sang que coule est rouge. All blood runs red. For the next 3 months, Eugene flew combat missions over the same battlefields where he had once fought as an infantryman. The view from above revealed the true scale of the war's devastation: mile after mile of cratered earth, abandoned villages, forests reduced to stumps. It was a landscape from hell, and Eugene was one of its guardian angels. Flying in World War I required a unique combination of skill, courage, and luck. Aircraft were fragile machines that could be brought down by a single well-placed bullet. Pilots carried no parachutes. They were considered both unreliable and cowardly. When an aircraft caught fire, pilots faced a choice between burning alive or jumping to their deaths. Eugene flew 25 to 27 combat missions, engaging German aircraft in aerial duels that were part ballet, part deathmatch. He was officially credited with shooting down at least one German plane, though some sources claim 2 victories. On one mission, his aircraft was hit by nearly 100 bullets but somehow remained airworthy long enough for Eugene to limp home to base. The nickname Black Swallow of Death followed him through the skies over France. German pilots knew of the Black American who flew with Les Hirondelles de la Mort, and Eugene's reputation for fearlessness spread through both armies. But Eugene's aerial career would be cut short by the very country whose freedom he had died to protect. When the United States entered the war in April 1917, American military officials established a medical board to recruit pilots for the U.S. Air Service. Eugene applied along with 28 other Americans flying for France. 28 pilots were accepted. Eugene Bullard was rejected. The reason was never officially stated, but everyone knew why. Eugene was black, and the United States military was rigidly segregated. America would rather field fewer pilots than allow a black man to fly in its service. Eugene continued flying for France, finding some comfort in knowing that I was able to go on fighting on the same front and in the same cause as other citizens of the United States. But the rejection stung. His own country had declared him unfit for service despite his proven record of courage and skill. Eugene's flying career ended in January 1918, after he clashed with a French superior officer while on leave in Paris. Though he had earned more than a dozen medals for his service, he was transferred to a desk job far from the front lines. He would serve out the war in relative obscurity, watching from the sidelines as the conflict that had made him famous ground to its inevitable conclusion. Chapter 3. The Jazz Age expatriate. When the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, Eugene Bullard faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could return to America as a decorated war hero, or he could remain in France as a free man. For Eugene, it was no choice at all. Post-war Paris was intoxicating. The city that had survived 4 years of war erupted in celebration, creativity, and defiance. Artists, writers, musicians, and dreamers flocked to Montmartre, turning the hilltop district into a laboratory for modern culture. And at the center of this explosion of creativity stood Eugene Bullard. Eugene found work as a jazz drummer at Zelly's, one of Montmartre's most famous nightclubs. The owner, Joe Zelly, recognized Eugene's talents extended far beyond music. Eugene spoke fluent French, English, and enough German to get by. He was a war hero with connections throughout Parisian society. Most importantly, he understood both the business of entertainment and the art of survival. Working with a lawyer friend named Robert Henri, Eugene helped Zelly secure the permits that allowed the club to stay open past midnight, a crucial advantage in Paris's competitive nightlife scene. Zelly's became the most celebrated nightclub in Montmartre, drawing everyone from European royalty to American expatriates seeking the freedom Paris offered. But Eugene's ambitions extended beyond drumming. He traveled briefly to Alexandria, Egypt, where he performed with a jazz ensemble and fought in 2 prize fights. He worked as a masseur and exercise trainer, building a network of wealthy clients who appreciated his discretion and professionalism. In 1924, Eugene achieved his ultimate goal. He became the proprietor of Le Grand Duc, a nightclub at the heart of Montmartre's African-American expatriate community. Le Grand Duc wasn't just a business. It was a cultural institution where the Harlem Renaissance met Parisian sophistication. Eugene's club attracted the greatest names in jazz and literature. Josephine Baker danced on his stage. Louis Armstrong played his trumpet in the intimate space. Langston Hughes tended bar while working on his poetry. Ernest Hemingway was such a regular that he based a character in The Sun Also Rises on Eugene. The club was more than entertainment, it was a statement. In Jim Crow America, black and white Americans couldn't share the same restaurants, theaters, or hotels. But in Eugene's Paris club, they mingled freely, united by their love of music and their rejection of American racial prejudice. Eugene's success wasn't limited to nightlife. He opened Bullard's Athletic Club, a gymnasium offering physical culture, boxing, massage, and hydrotherapy. He trained notable boxers, including Panama Al Brown and Young Perez. His clients included some of the wealthiest and most influential people in Paris. On July 17, 1923, Eugene married Marcelle Eugenie Henriette Strawman, the daughter of a wealthy Parisian family. Their wedding was a social event that demonstrated how completely Eugene had integrated into French society. Here was a black American from rural Georgia marrying into French high society, and Parisian newspapers covered the event with genuine warmth. Eugene and Marcelle had 2 daughters, Jacqueline and Lolita, before separating in 1931. Though they divorced, Eugene remained devoted to his children, working to provide them with opportunities he had never had. By the late 1920s, Eugene Bullard had achieved something remarkable. He was genuinely famous in France. Newspapers covered his boxing matches and business ventures. Society photographers captured him at elegant parties. He was living proof that talent and determination could overcome racial prejudice. But dark clouds were gathering across Europe. In 1929, the Wall Street crash devastated the global economy, and Eugene's nightclub business suffered. More ominously, in Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were gaining power, preaching a gospel of racial hatred that would soon engulf the world. Eugene's clubs became unexpectedly popular with German military officials visiting Paris. What they didn't know was that Eugene spoke fluent German, having learned it during his travels. As the Nazi threat grew, French intelligence approached Eugene with a proposition. Would he spy on his German customers? Eugene agreed without hesitation. He had seen fascism's early stages in the anti-Semitic and racist movements spreading across Europe. He understood that Hitler's Germany represented an existential threat not just to France, but to everything Eugene believed about human dignity and equality. For years, Eugene operated as a civilian intelligence asset, plying the Germans with champagne while pretending he didn't speak German. He listened to their conversations, noted their questions about French military installations, and passed information to his French handlers. It was dangerous work that could have cost him his life, but Eugene had never shied away from danger. Chapter 4. The Second War. On June 10, 1940, Eugene Bullard's world collapsed. German tanks rolled into Paris, and the city that had given him freedom fell under Nazi occupation. Eugene's nightclubs were forced to close, his German spy network was blown, and he faced a choice between collaboration and resistance. At age 46, Eugene chose to fight. Remarkably, Eugene re-enlisted in the French military, joining the 51st Infantry Regiment in a desperate attempt to defend what remained of free France. At the defense of Orleans on June 15, 1940, Eugene was again wounded by enemy fire, but he refused to surrender. As France collapsed around him, Eugene made a harrowing escape. With the help of other Americans and French resistance fighters, he was smuggled out of occupied France through Spain. It was a journey that nearly cost him his life. Wounded, hunted by the Gestapo, carrying forged papers, Eugene relied on the same survival instincts that had carried him from rural Georgia to the heights of Parisian society. In July 1940, Eugene boarded a ship in Spain bound for New York. After 28 years in Europe, he was returning to America. But the country he found bore little resemblance to the one he had left. When Eugene's ship docked in New York Harbor, white veterans were greeted by representatives of the American Legion who offered them hotel accommodations and financial assistance. Eugene, the only black veteran on the ship, was offered nothing. He found an apartment in Harlem and began the painful process of arranging for his daughters to join him from France. America in 1940 was still rigidly segregated. The man who had been feted by French high society, who had owned successful businesses and hobnobbed with celebrities, was now just another black man in Jim Crow America. He worked as a longshoreman until his war injuries made the physical labor unbearable. He sold French perfumes door to door in the Hudson Valley. He worked as a security guard. The indignities were constant and humiliating. On a bus near Peekskill, Eugene refused to move to the back as demanded by the driver. In the ensuing altercation, the driver punched Eugene repeatedly in the face, causing permanent damage to his left eye. Eugene was in his 50s, a decorated war veteran, but in America that meant nothing. The most devastating blow came in 1949 during the Peekskill riots. Eugene had gone to hear his friend Paul Robeson perform at a benefit concert. Robeson, the great actor and singer, had been blacklisted as a communist sympathizer during the early days of the Cold War. As concertgoers left the venue, they were attacked by an angry mob that included local police officers. Eugene was knocked to the ground and beaten by 2 policemen, a state trooper, and civilian attackers. The assault was captured on film, providing stark evidence of the violence that still awaited black Americans who dared to assert their dignity. Eugene found work as an elevator operator at Rockefeller Center, the same building where NBC filmed its television programs. Day after day, he transported wealthy executives and celebrities between floors, his war medals hidden beneath his operator's uniform. Most of his passengers had no idea they were riding with one of the most decorated American veterans alive. Eugene lived in relative obscurity until that December morning in 1959 when Dave Garroway invited him onto the Today Show. The interview lasted only a few minutes, but it generated hundreds of letters from viewers amazed by Eugene's story. Here was an American hero they had never heard of, living in plain sight. That same year, on his 64th birthday, Eugene was made a Knight of the French Legion of Honor, France's highest decoration. General Charles de Gaulle personally honored him, calling Eugene a true French hero. The ceremony took place in New York, but it might as well have been on another planet from the America that had ignored Eugene's contributions for decades. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. Eugene Bullard died of stomach cancer on October 12, 1961, at the age of 66. His funeral was attended by a handful of friends and his 2 daughters. The New York Times ran a brief obituary identifying him as a Negro flyer who was honored in France. Eugene was buried with military honors in the French War Veterans section of Flushing Cemetery in Queens. His friend Louis Armstrong would later be buried in the same cemetery, 2 black Americans who had found fame abroad while being ignored at home. But Eugene's story didn't end with his death. In the years following his funeral, historians and journalists began to piece together the full scope of his achievements. What they found was staggering. Eugene Bullard had been more than America's first black military pilot. He had been a Renaissance man who excelled in multiple fields during one of history's most turbulent periods. He had survived the trenches of World War I, the aerial combat of early aviation, the cultural explosion of 1920s Paris, Nazi occupation, and the civil rights struggles of mid-century America. In 1972, 11 years after his death, Eugene's story was finally told in The Black Swallow of Death, the incredible story of Eugene Jacques Bullard. The book revealed the full scope of his achievements to an American public that had ignored him in life. But the most important recognition came in 1994, 33 years after Eugene's death. On August 23, exactly 77 years to the day after he was rejected by the U.S. Air Service, Eugene Bullard was posthumously commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. The ceremony took place at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Eugene's daughters, now elderly women themselves, watched as their father finally received the recognition his own country had denied him. It was a moment of justice delayed by 3/4 of a century. Today, Eugene's legacy lives on in multiple ways. There's a statue of him at the Museum of Aviation in Warner Robins, Georgia. He's been inducted into the Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame and the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Schools and scholarships bear his name. But perhaps the most fitting tribute comes from the young people who discover his story each year. Students like Terrence Chester, a distant relative who won history contests by telling Eugene's story, carrying forward the legacy of a man who refused to accept the limitations others placed on him. Final chapter. All Blood Runs Red. Eugene Bullard titled his unfinished autobiography, All Blood Runs Red. A simple phrase that captured his entire philosophy. In trenches and cockpits, nightclubs and elevators, Eugene had lived by the belief that human worth couldn't be measured by skin color or nationality. His journey from a Jim Crow shotgun house to the heights of Parisian society and back to obscurity in America reveals the contradictions that have always defined the American experience. Eugene was simultaneously proof of American potential and evidence of American failure, a man whose greatness was recognized everywhere except the country of his birth. Eugene's story reminds us that heroism often goes unrecognized, that courage is often rewarded with indifference, and that justice delayed is indeed justice denied. But it also reminds us that individuals can transcend the limitations placed on them by circumstances, prejudice, and history. Eugene Bullard never flew in combat for the United States military, but he fought for American ideals his entire life. He believed in a world where talent mattered more than ancestry, where courage counted more than color, where all blood truly ran red. In the end, Eugene Bullard's greatest victory wasn't shooting down German aircraft or earning French medals. It was simply refusing to accept that his dreams were impossible. He proved that a black boy from rural Georgia could rise as high as his courage would carry him, even if his own country refused to acknowledge the achievement. Eugene Bullard was America's first black military pilot, but more importantly, he was a reminder that the American dream has always belonged to those brave enough to claim it, even when America itself wasn't ready to embrace them. His story challenges us to ask uncomfortable questions about our past and our present. How many other Eugene Bullards have we overlooked? How many talents have we wasted because of prejudice? How many heroes have died in obscurity because their heroism didn't fit our narrow definitions? But Eugene's story also offers hope. It shows us that individuals can overcome seemingly impossible odds, that courage can triumph over hatred, that truth eventually emerges even when buried under decades of neglect. Today, as America continues to grapple with questions of race, identity, and belonging, Eugene Bullard's voice echoes across the century that separates us from his adventures. All blood runs red, he insisted, and in that simple phrase lies both an indictment of our past failures and a blueprint for our future possibilities. Eugene Bullard flew higher than anyone thought possible for a boy born into Jim Crow, Georgia. His flight path took him from the cotton fields of Columbus to the trenches of Verdun, from the nightclubs of Montmartre to the skies over France, from the heights of fame to the depths of obscurity, and finally, decades after his death, to the recognition he had always deserved. He was the Black Swallow of Death, America's forgotten hero, living proof that courage knows no color and that greatness can emerge from the most unlikely places. His story is uniquely American in its contradictions, its struggles, and ultimately, its triumph over the forces that would deny human dignity. In remembering Eugene Bullard, we remember not just one man's extraordinary life, but the countless others who have fought for recognition, for justice, for the simple right to be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Eugene Bullard's blood ran red, and in the end, that was enough to carry him from obscurity to immortality, from the shadows of history to the bright light of recognition, from a forgotten elevator operator to his rightful place among America's greatest heroes. The Black Swallow of Death had finally come home. The END like and subscribe.